A family of languages is a group of languages so similar to one another in structure and vocabulary as to compel the belief that they are all descended from some common ancestor. There are about 100 such families in existence, of which the Indo-European, Semitic, Hamitic, and Turanian are the best known. All of the Turanian languages, for example, such as Finnish, Turkish, and Mongolian, afford evidences of more or less kinship with one another. But between them and the Semitic languages, such as Hebrew, there is no more similarity than may be due to occasional borrowings or perhaps to mere chance. The members of the Indo-European family are now scattered over Europe and Asia, and both the languages themselves and the people who speak them differ widely among themselves. But it is indisputable that the languages are descended from a common parent's speech, and it seems probable that most of the peoples who speak them are descended from one parent race. It is possible, from internal evidence, to learn much about the parent race and language. For example, from presence in many widely scattered members of the family of cognate words for father, mother, grandson, etc., we are clearly safe in arguing that the original Indo-Europeans had a well-developed domestic life. From similar evidence, it is almost as conclusively shown that they were a pastoral people who knew the uses of milk and honey. Efforts have been made to locate their original home by showing what kinds of animals and plants were known to them, but the evidence is very uncertain. Perhaps they lived on the northern shores of the Black Sea, perhaps somewhere in Central Asia. At any rate, they separated many centuries before the beginning of their recorded history. The whole Indo-European family is divisible into smaller groups or branches. For example, the English and German languages are more closely related to each other than to French or Welsh. And this fact is indicated by saying that they belong to the Teutonic branch of the family, while French belongs to the Latin branch, and Welsh to the Celtic. There are 6 other branches generally recognized, their mutual relationship being indicated in the following table. But these 3 are of most interest in our present study, and the Teutonic branch is the only one that we need consider in detail. In the last section, it was said that English and German are more nearly related than English and French. This fact is somewhat obscured by the great influence exercised by French over English in modern times. After the Norman conquest, so many French words became naturalized in English that French now seems to many students less foreign than German. But in order to assign our language to the proper branch of the Indo-European family, we must consider only blood relations, not relations by adoption. We must look at English as it was in its infancy, before it was exposed to Latin and French influences. When we do this, we find that English is unmistakably Teutonic. The Teutonic languages are distinguished from those of other branches by a large number of very old words which belong to them in common, and to them exclusively. But there are 2 other peculiarities besides those of vocabulary, which enable us most decisively to prove their mutual relationship. One of these peculiarities is a certain uniformity or law as to the accentuation of words. The original law of Teutonic accent was, in brief, that the root syllable received the stress, except in nouns and adjectives, which accented the first syllable. If a word was inflected, the accent did not vary with the inflectional endings. In Latin, on the other hand, the accent depended on the quantity of the penult, and in Greek, it in part depended on the quantity of syllables, and in part was seemingly arbitrary. Compare, for example, begins with incipit, brother, brotherhood, with socius, societat, societas, and try to find a parallel in English or German for this Teutonic law of accent is part of the genius of Teutonic languages and shows amazing persistency even. This Teutonic law of accent is part of the genius of the Teutonic languages and shows amazing persistence, even in modern English, after centuries of linguistic adulteration. The noun and the verb produce, with their different accents, illustrate the still prevailing tendency to throw back the accent of substantives. The second distinguishing features of the Teutonic languages is a peculiar change which their consonants have suffered. The consonant sounds chiefly affected are those known to students of Greek grammar as the three classes of mutes, viz., labial mutes, palatal mutes, lingual mutes. The change referred to is as follows. Words in the original Indo-European language, which were retained in the Teutonic branch, in many cases changed the second consonant in each of these classes to the first, and the first to the third. Thus, if there was a in the Indo-European word, it became a in the Teutonic. Became, and so on to the list. The law of this consonant shift was discovered by Grimm and is known as Grimm's law. Examples are seen in the English foot, German Fuß, Greek, Latin pes, in which the initial consonant preserves the original Indo-European form. So English, no, German kennen, from the same root as conozco. English hen, German Hahn, from the same root as canere. In the last example, the sound of is represented by a less guttural aspirate. This law is not universal in its application, but the exceptions to it are governed by regular laws of their own. These, however, need not be considered here. Each of the 9 branches of the family underwent further ramifications of its own. Thus, from the Latin branch sprang in ancient times the language of the Samnites, and in more modern times, all the 8 so-called Romance languages, chief among which are French, Italian, and Spanish. The history of the Teutonic branch is shown in the following table. Teutonic branch, West Germanic, Anglo-Frisian, Old English, Middle English, Modern English, Old Frisian, Flemish, Common German, Old High German, Middle High German, Modern High German, Common German, Old Low German, Dutch. Teutonic branch, East Germanic, Gothic. Old Norse, West Norse, East Icelandic and Norwegian. Old Norse, East Norse, Swedish, and Danish. It must be kept in mind that the ancestral language designated in the table as Teutonic is not in existence, and that no express record of it has ever been found. But by comparing the existing Indo-European languages, we can prove that such a tongue must have been spoken at some remote past time. In other words, the ancestors of all the Teutonic peoples probably kept together and spoke a common language for a long time after they separated from the other branches of the family. In like manner, the Anglo-Frisian, the West and East Germanic, and the Common German are purely hypothetical languages. The only evidence of their past existence is found by comparative study of the younger tongues now extant. But that evidence is in most cases conclusive. The table therefore merely presents graphically the inferences drawn by students of comparative linguistics. Such students do not always agree. Some, for example, reject the notion of an Anglo-Frisian tongue altogether and derive from the West Germanic 2 groups of modern Germanic languages. The High and the Low. What we ordinarily call German is modern High German, while English, Flemish, and Dutch, according to this view, should all be regarded as belonging to the Low German group. Whichever view we take of this matter, one distinctive feature of High German is worth noting. When we compare English and German cognate words, we often find their general likeness partly obscured by a difference in consonants. Close study has shown that this difference is due to a second change which High German has suffered, along the line pointed out by Grimm's law. According to Grimm's law, certain consonants moved up one step in their respective classes in the days before English and German separated. According to another law, recently discovered, some of these consonants took a second step in the same direction after the separation, but this second step was in general taken only in the High German member of the branch. Thus we find in German dick for the English thick, dorn for thorn, durch for through, durst for thirst, tau for dew, tower for deer, tier for deer, etc. In some cases, by comparing Latin or Greek with English and German, we can see the progress of both consonant changes in the same word. For example, the initial consonant of the word represented in Greek by, and in Latin by tonare, suffered by Grimm's law before it appeared in the English, thunder, and then in High German suffered the second change before it finally appeared as D in donner. When the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes came to Britain, they did not speak exactly alike, but the differences were so slight that we regard them as speaking not 3 languages but 3 dialects of one language. That one language is often called Anglo-Saxon, and this name is correct enough, as the Angle and Saxon members of the invading people were so much more numerous than the Jutes, but it is now more customary to speak of it as Old English. This name serves better to indicate the relation of the language to modern English, and it also presents a conventional parallel to the accepted names of Old High German, Old French, Old Norse, etc. The English of the later Middle Ages after the Norman conquest is commonly called Middle English. Of the 3 original forms of English, that spoken by the Angle has proved of most importance in the history of the language. It split up at an early date into 2 dialects, called Northumbrian and Mercian, after the names of the 2 chief Anglian kingdoms in the Heptarchy. From the speech of the Saxons also there sprang several different dialects, but the foremost of them was the West Saxon, that of Alfred's kingdom. These 3 dialects, Northumbrian, Mercian, and West Saxon, were spoken in the northern, midland, and southern parts of English Britain, respectively. Owing to the long political supremacy of Wessex, the southern dialect attained a decided literary supremacy toward the end of the Old English period, and nearly all the Old English literature that has come down to us is written in West Saxon. Several centuries later, however, after the Norman conquest, the speech of the Midland countries became the prevailing dialect, and from it grew our modern English language. Thus, it appears that the standard Old English was not the parent of the standard modern English, in the strictest sense, but the connection between the different parts of England was so close, even in early times, that the dialects influenced each other very materially, and modern English therefore contains many words which owe their form to the northern or southern dialect, rather than to the Mercian. Indeed, it is hardly fair to say that it is descended from the Mercian dialect at all, except in a geographical sense.